Hi everyone. Before starting the episode, I want to let you all know that I'm having an open-ended Q&A or Ask Me Anything type of session for listeners that are lawyers and law students. I'm going to be focusing on the business side of running immigration practice and the law itself. And it's open to lawyers from all practice areas, not just immigration lawyers. It could be people that are thinking of switching up or getting involved a little bit in dabbling in immigration, as well as law students. I'm particularly going to discuss social media marketing and branding for immigration lawyers, and on the law side, the so-called 90-day rule. The initial group is going to be kept small since it's the first time I'm doing this, but to lock in a place, please send me an email as soon as possible to info@immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com. Again, that's info@immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com. Lawyers is plural. It's set for Friday, May 31st at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Again, that's May 31st, a Friday, at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on the East Coast and 12 noon on the West Coast. Welcome to episode 89 of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I'm interviewing my colleague and friend Sabrina Damast. Sabrina practices primarily in the areas that I don't, such as removal, humanitarian appeals, and post-conviction relief. So I wanted to bring her on to share her experiences in these practice areas and so you can know more about her. This will be an especially good primer for law students, new lawyers, and those thinking about adding or switching to these practice areas. As always, you can get the podcast and more practice info and news at the immigrationlawyerstoolbox.com. If you're listening through iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube, or anywhere else, please leave a like, comment, and 5 stars. Much appreciated. Without further ado, let's get it started. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining this episode. We're going to be here with Sabrina Damast. Is Damast the right, proper way to say it?
Damast, but close enough, like the mast of a ship.
I know you for years, I should be able to say it right, so you still say Damast. Sabrina.
That's okay, there's a certain immigration judge in LA who still insists on calling me Attorney Damast, so you got it much closer.
So, Sabrina, I've known her for many years now in LA, fellow immigration in LA who's brought a practice. You do removal defense, you do federal court stuff, and we're going to go into that. But just to start, can you tell me about where you came from, how you got into immigration law?
Well, where I came from is almost as long of a story as how I got into immigration law. I've actually lived in 7 different states, so I guess I'm originally from sort of the East Coast at large, but I moved out to LA 7.5 years ago. Oh, okay. And that now takes first place for the place that I've lived longest. So I guess I might as well be a native Angelino at this point. How I got into immigration law. I think if you'd asked me that question when I graduated, I would have given you a different answer. I would have told you that it was sort of a coincidence. I had gotten into an immigration clinic and a bunch of internships, and then by the time I got into the Department of Justice Attorney General Honors Program and been made a law clerk in the LA Immigration Court, my destiny as an immigration lawyer had been sealed. But like many people, my family has an immigration story, and having now done this for 7.5 years, I think probably had some, subconscious influence on why I applied to that immigration clinic, right? My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She and her family traveled through a number of countries in Europe for 2 years trying to escape. She grew up speaking 10 languages. Wow. It's almost the quintessential immigration story if it weren't for the tragedy of the background of it.
Well, that's quintessential too.
I guess so.
The highest level of it from Holocaust, but yeah.
Absolutely. And she and her family were actually in a displaced persons camp in Jamaica for 8 years before they were eventually given visas to come to the U.S. and resettle. So now that I've been doing this for as long as I have, I think my own personal history, or my own growing up understanding the humanity of what can push people to immigrate halfway across the world probably had something to do with why I initially applied to that immigration clinic in law school.
So what year were you in the immigration clinic? What are you, second, 2L or 3L?
Yeah, so the year I did it was my fall semester of second year. They had an immigration externship clinic at my law school, so I got placed at a community agency that did lots of different types of legal services, but in my case, immigration legal services for survivors of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So I started off with some of the more compelling things that you can do in this area.
So VAWA cases, I-751s, and they're solo.
VAWA self-petitions was what I worked on that semester.
Okay, and so that's pretty deep. And how long does a VAWA case take? It takes more than a semester, doesn't it?
It does. So, I mean, I was working on some of the more key components, the declarations with the applicants. But those cases, even if you can manage to get them prepared and filed in a semester, certainly penned for, well, now they penned for years. So I actually don't know if they were ever granted. I hope so.
I guess there's someone at the clinic who oversees that as it goes on, but the day-to-day aspects of it, the students run.
Right. So it's a little different because it was an externship program.
Okay.
They had an in-house immigration clinic too that was more along those lines. But this one was an externship clinic, so I was going to a community agency. So the community agency was managing their caseload and taking responsibility.
Did you take immigration courses, or did they have immigration courses at your law school?
They did. I took a semester of immigration law. That was in my second year, and then they offered an advanced immigration law class too, if I remember right, my third year, and I took that as well. And I think that was run by somebody from the ACLU, an adjunct, and it had a lot more to do with sort of the federal litigation of immigration, while the first year class was a lot more of what we actually do every day as lawyers, right? Who's eligible for what kind of immigration status and why.
Mm-hmm. So then when you graduated, you didn't go into private practice. You went for the DOJ special position?
Yes. So for 2 years after I graduated, I was with the DOJ Attorney General Honors Program. So I was a judicial law clerk in the Los Angeles Immigration Court doing research and helping draft decisions for the LA court immigration judges.
So you moved to LA just for this position?
I did. I even took the New York bar when I graduated because I thought, I'm not staying in LA. I'm going back east. You can see how well that worked out 5.5 years later. I subsequently took the California bar too, so.
Oh, you're a glutton for punishment, especially if you're doing immigration.
I know.
You don't have to do it.
I know. So my practice developed. For some reason, when I was at the immigration court, I got all of what we would call, or not all, but very, very many of what we would call the crimmigration cases.
Yeah.
Right. The people who had immigration problems, either because of criminal histories that was preventing them from getting immigration status or was jeopardizing whatever immigration status they may have had already. And so it's a very niche area. It's a very complex area. A lot of immigration lawyers don't want to touch those things. Go over there. And because I did so many cases at the immigration court, I was able to develop a certain level of expertise.
How hard is it starting off to learn that? I'm sure a lot of the judges don't know because it changes every day, it seems. There's a ruling that comes out from this district court or that appeals court.
The Ninth Circuit is always changing the game for us.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's one of those areas that if you're going to practice it, you have to practice it at the highest levels. You have to be willing to constantly be checking for new court cases and really reading them and digesting them and thinking about how they change all the open cases you're currently representing. I found it really interesting, so it kept me engaged, and that's why I liked it, and I kept doing it. And when I went into private practice after I finished, it ended up being a large amount of my current caseload. The problem with being a crimmigration guru is that you have to tell a lot of your clients that their immigration cases are really they're hopeless because of criminal histories, and so it motivated me, shall we say, to take the California bar so I could also start doing post-conviction relief, which was basically the work of going back into criminal court and trying to modify those convictions in a way that wouldn't impact the person's immigration status anymore.
How come you didn't stay with the government?
Sequestration was in effect when I finished my 2-year program. They were not hiring. Typically, my program was a feeder into other government offices, so I went to private practice, but honestly, I don't have any regrets that I did that. I love the work I do. I love getting to represent people and litigate on their behalves and advocate on their behalfs.
And so how did it start? Did you just put up shingles and start solo, or how did you get that transition going?
I worked for another small firm for about 13 months. It was a great opportunity to sort of pair the legal knowledge that I had obtained working as a research attorney, essentially, for the judges with the practical application of how do you take that knowledge of the law and actually create an application or an evidentiary submission for your client. And then after about 13 months with that firm, I left and I opened my own practice.
What was it that pushed you to do something like that? Because it's a scary thing to just go on your own. what gave you the confidence that that's going to work, and just to give up something that's more
Stable.
stable? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think I just reached a point where I was at a crossroads. I had been waiting to see if the government sequestration would end, and had been thinking about reapplying to government and going back, but that was a very unpredictable timeline with the politics of hiring at the time, and I saw that I wanted to do cases of a certain type, and when you're working at someone else's firm, you don't always have the choice or the ability to find clients that have cases that are interesting to you.
Yeah.
And so I was grateful for the learning experience that I had there. It really was a significant part of my legal training, but I was glad to be able to go out and build a practice that was based around the kinds of cases that I enjoyed.
That's the same here. When I made my practice, I wanted a specific type of case, clientele, and that's, at a firm, they just give you the case and say, do it. And it's great experience, and you like the people you're around, but you want to do things your way. Certain people are like that, and I guess you and I are both one of those. They want to do it our way. Definitely. What is your structure right now? How do you handle cases with regards to people and size and all that kind of stuff?
Well, my firm is I'm the only lawyer right now, and I have a full-time assistant, Diego, who's amazing. He's helps me to keep the roof not catching on fire. In terms of structure and cases, I mean, I've really run the gamut of everything other than employment-based immigration. I've done one employment-based case so far. It's always good to stretch your knowledge and try something new. And I enjoyed it, but it's definitely not my typical case. But my typical cases include, removal defense at the immigration court, appeals from those cases, post-conviction relief, affirmative asylums, other forms of humanitarian immigration, your basic family-based immigration case, if there is such a thing anymore, as a basic immigration case. So anything other than employment-based, and I've got open cases of all kinds. Keeps it interesting.
So let's start from the first part of that list of things you do. I mean, the first thing you talk about is crimmigration. What do you use to keep up on it? Do you use Westlaw and stuff, or does that come in handy? Or immigration is just kind of more open-ended, where you could get resources for new laws and stuff?
I mean, I definitely have a Westlaw account. You have to have access to a good research database, because there's always going to be some new question you haven't thought of, you haven't contemplated. You need to research the elements of the state conviction. You need to see if another circuit has answered this question, even if yours hasn't. Sort of forward thinking, right? Because Westlaw is particularly helpful, especially for cases that, of course, came out before I was an attorney. But forward thinking, I every 4 weeks or so, it used to be more often, but I've been a little bit busy at work, publish a series of blog posts on my website that are case updates. So I monitor all of the circuit court websites, all the courts of appeals, and the Board of Immigration Appeals for new published cases that can impact immigration. So that's any immigration case, obviously, but also for the crimmigration angle, many federal criminal sentencing cases employ the same kind of analysis that you do for a crimmigration case, right? So oftentimes they're looking at the same kind of crimes and the same kinds of comparisons that you'll need to look at from an immigration perspective. So I also read those and try to keep up on them. And by blogging about them, it really makes me think about them and synthesize them, and then I save them into my research library. And hopefully that helps me stay on top of things pretty well.
I hear that. That's hard. I just try to keep up on a couple of business cases. It's hard. All the circuits, both criminal stuff and immigration. You could be a full-time staffer that just does that.
I was once even more ambitious and used to read the unpublished cases too on the circuit court websites. I did that for about 2 years, and then I just realized there are only so many hours in the work week.
Yeah.
And so I've scaled back to just the published cases now.
That's awesome. So with regards to post-conviction relief, what does that mean, and what does it entail, and what kind of stuff do you do there?
So post-conviction relief is for people who have already pled guilty. Sometimes they're still serving sentences of probation or parole, or they could even still technically be in criminal jail. Sometimes their convictions are from years ago, and all of that is finished, right? They have nothing more to do with the criminal system. But regardless of where the criminal case is in its stages, it is impacting their immigration status, either their current status or their ability to get to obtain status that they don't already have. So a post-conviction relief is basically analyzing whether or not there were any kind of constitutional or procedural errors, usually during a plea bargaining process, in that criminal case that would allow me to reopen it and withdraw the guilty plea that the person entered and hopefully renegotiate some kind of outcome that doesn't have those kinds of immigration consequences for them.
How often does it happen that you could do something like that?
California is actually a really great state to practice these things in. Our legislature has been really generous about creating new mechanisms for people to go and do this. I think the California legislature has a really good understanding about what kinds of traumatic and draconian impacts a really minor conviction can have on immigration. And as a result, they have tried to create as many paths as possible for immigration lawyers or post-conviction attorneys, in conjunction with the immigration lawyers advising them, to go in and try to fix some of these messes that their clients found themselves in. So I'd say there's a pretty good array of cases in which there's something you can try. Whether you're going to be successful, it's like anything else. It'll depend on your judge. It'll depend on how well your client can testify. Sometimes it depends on what the criminal defense attorney remembers about the case and can help you to reconstruct what happened 20 years ago.
How often are they helpful in that?
They're usually pretty helpful in my
Okay.
experience. I mean, look, sometimes you're asking a criminal defense attorney, is it possible you screwed up somewhere?
Yeah.
And of course, that's always a tense conversation to have with another colleague. But I think many of them, if they can help, they will. And many of them, it's just a matter of, this case was 20 years ago. I don't remember it. I don't have a file.
Yeah.
I'm happy to write you a declaration saying I don't remember it, and I don't have a file for whatever value that is. And sometimes it's also valuable, to at least be able to say that your client is the only one who recollects the specific details of what happened.
And how long does it take for initial analysis of each of these cases? I'm sure you have to read a lot of stuff, so just a consultation might not be enough. It requires several hours of review just to see if it's a yes or no, or...
Yeah, oh, absolutely. The initial consultation. Unless your client is really diligent, your consulting potential client has gone to the criminal court, to the archives, they've obtained the entire court file, they have ordered whatever transcripts are still available from court reporters' notes, they've contacted their prior defense counsel and gotten their file, and I have not yet had a client who has done all of those things to consult with me, then there's going to be a preliminary investigation that you have to do.
Do they get frustrated because that takes so much legal hours they got to pay for it? Did they come in calling you for a free consultation when it requires that much work to just figure out if it's possible?
No, I mean, I think they're pretty respectful. I mean, they understand that this investigation is for their good too, right?
Yeah.
That if I'm going in and doing this whole case, it's going to cost a lot more for them than the investigation fee. And what the investigation does is at least provide them with some realistic assessment of whether it's worth investing those funds. So I have to say my clients have by and large been pretty respectful of why it is I charge for those kinds of services early on.
So I get calls and emails saying, first tell me if it's possible, then we'll have a consultation. It's like, well,
sure, people, I get those too, and thankfully I have an assistant now, so he takes those calls. And we have an office policy. There's a consultation fee. We don't do free consults as a matter of policy. And if folks are not willing to spend the consultation fee to sit down with me and figure out what needs to be done, then there's lots of other lawyers they can talk to in the city.
Yeah, like with LA is a lot of attorneys.
There's so many immigration attorneys in the LA area.
So post-conviction leave, how often do you go to federal court to do appeals, and do you ever go to the Ninth Circuit and argue in front of them?
Absolutely. I've argued before the Ninth Circuit twice.
Wow.
Lost one, won one, so there you go. It's batting 500 is great, right?
Yep.
I have probably at least half a dozen cases open at the Ninth Circuit. Either briefing is done and we're waiting for oral arguments, or briefing is in the middle.
How long does that take once you submit a briefing? Oral arguments happen? Years? Okay.
I've got a case. I took over the Ninth Circuit case after it had been open for about a year, but I think it's a 2013 filing, and we're still just waiting for oral arguments or a decision without oral arguments. It's just sitting there.
Now, the case that you won for oral arguments, what kind of facts were at issue?
It was a Crimmigration case, and actually it was not my case, but I stepped in for a colleague for the oral arguments at her request. We won because after the oral arguments, the government came back and agreed to remand. So I didn't actually end up getting a decision from the Ninth Circuit saying I was right, but I took it as a victory that the government decided there was a significant enough possibility that I was right that they were going to send the case back to the lower courts. So it was a great case.
That's pretty terrible in that the client had to go through all that to the ninth just for the government to give in and be like, let's take it down.
So during the time the case was on appeal, there were a lot of positive legal developments for him.
Yeah.
So I won't fault the government so much in that case. In fact, we had this very unusual circumstance where we showed up for oral arguments, and the lead judge on the panel said, "Okay, counsels, look. Everybody knows there's this case pending at the Supreme Court right now that probably is going to be determinative of who wins this case. Mm-hmm. Don't talk about it, right? Tell us how you would want us to decide this case if that case wasn't pending at the Supreme Court," which was sort of a funny exercise because, of course, this case was pending, and, of course, everybody knew that however it came out was going to have a substantial impact on how this case should be determined. But they wanted the oral arguments anyway. They didn't want to defer and wait for the Supreme Court, which is often an option that the Ninth Circuit would exercise there. And so we gave our oral arguments. The Supreme Court case came out. It was favorable to my position. The government agreed to remand.
Is it nerve-wracking, like knowing you're going to like argue for the Ninth Circuit? So, like, what, do you have butterflies stomach, or did you just prep so much that you just went in there?
Both. I mean, you know, I'm an old moot courter from law school. I was on my school's moot court team. So, like any good moot courter, of course, I try to practice. I try to get a colleague to moot me at least once or twice before I go. I have them review my legal arguments, see if they think I missed anything important or if I'm focusing on the wrong ones in my oral arguments. But once I get up there, you just sort of get into the zone. It just sort of comes naturally. Hopefully, you're really having that conversation with the judges. That's how the best outcome for an oral argument, where it's not you keep trying to push one subject and the judges keep saying, no, we want to talk about something else. Hopefully you and the judges find the same wavelength.
Do you go out and study the judges? Because I don't know if Supreme Court, but Ninth Circuit, I mean, unless you're going there, I might not know them, but do you like study who would be more on your side and try to like do arguments? Or is that not going to go anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, you don't get to choose your panel, so to a certain degree, I don't indulge in that too much, right? My panel comes out, maybe I ask some colleagues, anybody argued before this judge, anybody have any thoughts on it? But your judges are who your judges are, right? You're not, so studying their inner workings and their inner thoughts probably isn't going to make much difference in how your case comes out.
So, I mean, you're doing a lot of different things that are all fun. Is there one that you enjoy the most? Like, would you want to make a whole practice out of arguing for the Ninth Circuit or just, then if you're in front of it enough, you're getting to know all of them, you'll know what to...
Well, the Ninth Circuit's really big. I mean, I don't know the exact count, but I think we're looking at about 30 judges, maybe.
Was that right? I thought it was like 18, 20, but you're probably right,
No, it's more than that. It's more than 18, I'm sure. Now I'm going to go check this after we're done.
I'm just randomly shooting numbers. That's
I'm going to go with it's maybe less than the 30 that I said, but probably more than 18.
Yeah.
So I don't know that you would ever really get to know them all. And I guess if I was there every day, but then when would I have time to write briefs if I was arguing every day?
Was the guy they got rid of, was that a California Supreme Court judge or Ninth? That was California, the guy who, Kaczynski?
No, he was a Ninth Circuit judge, Judge Kaczynski.
He was a head judge, wasn't
he? He was, but by the time he was taken off, he was no longer a chief judge. He had stepped down from his chief position, and somebody else had taken that. But yes, he was a former chief judge. I believe that's right.
Kind of crazy. It's like.
I think it goes to show treat your law clerks well, judges, for they will be your downfall in the future if you do not. I mean, it was a highly irregular situation, shall we say.
But it's interesting working Ninth Circuit. I always wonder poor people who work in, what is Texas? That's sixth or something? Fifth. Like, it must be a very stressful place to be a crimmigration attorney.
I think it's just a stressful place to be an immigration attorney.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been a few cases where the Fifth Circuit has led the way on positive immigration. I can think of one at least where it was the Fifth Circuit came out with a good decision, and then the Ninth Circuit followed. And actually, it was a colleague of mine who argued that case, Patrick Valdez. And I watched his oral arguments on YouTube because they live streamed the Ninth Circuit. And I remember one of the judges on the Ninth Circuit panel asking the government attorney, "Why do you want us to create a circuit split with the Fifth Circuit?"
What were the issues involved there?
That case had to do with how you start counting the 7 years after admission for lawful permanent resident cancellation of removal.
I see.
So his client had been a green card holder for less than 5 years when he was convicted of an offense that triggered the need for cancellation. But he had entered the U.S. many years earlier as a passenger in the car. And so they were discussing if that admission could start as an admission in any status for the purposes of starting that 7-year clock. Because if it did, then his client had the required 7 years before any of his criminal convictions, and if it didn't, he didn't. And the Fifth Circuit had already ruled that an admission in any status is just what it sounds like. Any kind of admission, regardless of whether you had actual immigration status. I mean, I think the language of the Fifth Circuit was an admission in any status includes an admission in illegal status, essentially.
Yeah.
And so the Ninth Circuit followed. They took the same position. It's a rare day where the Ninth and the Fifth Circuit are on the same page, I think, for an immigration case. But that was a good day.
Awesome. So what is, when it comes to the issues that you deal with on a day-to-day basis that you wish would change in our immigration system, what are one or two of the big ones that frustrates you?
Well, I think like everybody, just the lack of general resources in the system is so frustrating, right? I went to court this week with a client, and she has been given a trial date in February of 2022. And she started crying at the thought that she wasn't going to be able to resolve this for herself for at least 3 years. And she even said, "Judge, isn't there anything earlier?" And the judge said, "Look, this is what I've got right now. If you can find somebody else who has an earlier hearing that I've given with a less urgent case, your attorney can file a motion to swap hearing dates. That's fine with me. But right now, this is what the earliest date that I can give you." And it was just devastating for my client. So I think everybody feels the frustration of cases that keep going on and on. I mean, I have a different case that was supposed to be held for merits earlier this year that was scheduled 2 years earlier, and for no particular reason, about 6 weeks before it was scheduled, we got a notice that the court had taken it off the trial calendar and put it back onto a master calendar. It was supposed to be in master in March. Then we got a notice the master been continued to September. I mean,
how do you handle that in a business perspective? Because you're probably prepping, get ready for it, you're spending all this time, gets rescheduled, then you got the contract. Is there a contract opening that says if you?
I mean, most of the contracts are flat fees. So I mean, look, I'm out for the time. I have to prep it a second time. 6 months later, I got to prep it a second time. 6 months later, the client's paid for it.
Yeah, because like other business attorneys or other areas of law, they get to
hourly. Yeah. I mean, I do very little hourly work. It's mostly for advising purposes. Like if I'm being hired just to consult with a criminal defense attorney at the beginning of a criminal case about how they can resolve it in an immigration neutral manner, that's something I might do hourly. But most of my cases in immigration court, they're all flat fees.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So how do you like it? What direction do you have planned to take your firm?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer to that. It has grown naturally over the last 4.5 years. In a good way. Clients cases I enjoy, clients who I get along with. It's been a successful endeavor. I hope it'll just continue naturally along that path.
Well, you're a relatively new mother. Your daughter's a year now?
She just turned a year on Sunday.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, how do you balance that aspect of it?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, balance is definitely a challenge. I'm very lucky. My mom lives with us. She helps, with full-time childcare for our daughter because my husband also works full-time. That is a game changer for my ability to work crazy hours and do crazy cases and come up with crazy new litigation ideas. But, I try as best as I can to at least spend some weekends at home without working. It's, varying success one week to another.
Yeah, I've seen your Facebook take your daughter to work sometimes.
I do. That's actually really fun. My assistant loves her. She loves my assistant. In fact, he came to her birthday party on Sunday, and once he arrived, she wanted nobody else to hold her. She would, she'd kind of reach for somebody else. They'd take her, and then 3 seconds later, she'd be, "Oh, I'm done with you. Give me back to my Tio." And she'd go right back to Diego. And he loves her coming.
Yeah.
And I think she likes coming to the office too. But it's definitely a challenge. She's crawling like crazy. She's cruising with furniture, and we're not quite fully baby-proofed. Every time I bring her, I think of something else that I need to baby-proof in the office. So you got to keep 2 eyes on her and 2 eyes on the computer doing some work. I don't have enough eyes.
I have a 1-year-old, and it's impossible. He's like a madman, just running around. And he just started. Once he hit 1, he started walking and running. So we have to put locks on a lot of the cabinets and stuff, and now we have to put higher level locks. Everything is just locked. Even the toilets are put locks. So he likes to throw stuff in there and flush it. I'm like, how did he even learn that?
How did you learn to flush?
Yeah.
Is potty training coming soon for you?
I hope so. That'll make my life much easier. But it's just such a handful. There's no possible way to be
there's the idea of some mothers could work from home and do childcare or take care of the kid. It's just the kid's gonna be slamming on the keyboard and stuff.
Yeah.
It's two distinct full-time jobs.
In fact, she was sitting on my lap this afternoon before I came to meet with you, and I was doing some Westlaw research, and she was like, and I was like, okay, let's push the computer out of your reach. You can bang on the table, honey, while mommy types.
Awesome. So, kind of going back to what we talked about, like what law itself has been something like the 3 and 10 year bar is something that's frustrating.
Oh,
I was
sure.
talking with Nicholas Morales about immigration reform. He was saying if we could make TPS and DACA, at least some TPS candidates having the ability to adjust status if they have the citizenship. I never thought about TPS, but that's pretty valid for TPS holders been here for like 2 decades or something.
Oh yeah, I mean the latest congressional bill on this includes both of them. I think they're calling it the Dream and Promise Act.
Yeah.
And it's for DACA folks, TPS folks, and also DED librarians are also covered in there.
DED librarian?
Deferred enforced departure, I think is what it stands for.
Okay.
So it was some, renewable sort of stay of removal kind of thing from ICE, where they didn't have TPS anymore, but they were deferring the enforcement of, the departure of librarians.
Oh, interesting. I thought I would have known about that.
Yeah, it's a very small program, I think.
It's just they kept that in mind in the bill at least.
Yeah. So, but they put that in too. So, I mean, under the current congressional gridlock of one chamber with the Democrats and one with the Republicans in charge, I don't have a lot of hope that bill is going anywhere. But I think it's a pretty common sense sort of thing. Most of these people are, by definition of the programs that they're covered under, more or less law-abiding community members. Yeah. And long-term status and long-term presence in the U.S., strong ties, family ties, work ties, business ties, property ties. They're a good community to try to protect.
Now,
I agree with everything Nicholas says.
So, with regards to the effect of this current administration in practice, there's lack of resources, just kind of continuing the previous ones, constant changing of the rules. But is there some other things that you've noticed? Did the government shutdown affect your caseload?
I had a couple cases that got kicked down the road. But most of them weren't anywhere neither of them were in a place where it was so significant for me. But I'm sure a lot of our colleagues had trial cases that had been set for several years suddenly not having trial anymore. So the shutdown was a problem. I mean, I think. I did have court last week for a case that was set for a decision on eligibility, and the judge said, well, look, this was on my list of files to review during the shutdown. I haven't gotten caught up yet. She says, so I'm going to give you a trial date, but understand that I will issue some firm decision 60 days in advance on whether I think he's really eligible to proceed or not.
Oh, interesting. What about ICE enforcement? Have you seen any changes in that?
Oh, yeah.
And with the new ruling, Supreme Court ruling that came out yesterday.
2 days ago, I think, pre-op. No, I mean, it's going to be a disaster for people, the pre-op decision. It really is. I mean, you already have an environment where enforcement has just been ramped up by, multiple exponential degrees.
Yeah.
I just bonded somebody out less than 2 weeks ago, a mother of 2 U.S. citizen children, husband is a U.S. citizen. It was a terrible situation, and she was detained.
Mm-hmm. What led to her being detained? Is there sort of pullover? Or?
I think it was the new notice to appear policy at USCIS. She had a denied application at USCIS, and
how long after the denial did they?
About 3 months.
3 months after denial. Okay.
I think the denial was somewhere around November, and she got picked up in the first week of February.
So they can't pick her up. They didn't just give her a notice. They
they picked her up and they took her to detention. I had to bond her out of detention.
How difficult is it to bond someone out of detention?
Well, this one was pretty easy because the Department of Homeland Security attorney was highly unreasonable, and the judge was highly reasonable about it. He recognized that my client didn't need to be in detention and granted a very reasonable bond and let her go home to her family.
Mm-hmm. How much is bond amounts for this kind of stuff?
Oh, bond amounts? I mean, I was shocked maybe a year and a half ago that I still got a $1,500 bond from a judge, which is the statutory minimum that they can grant. I didn't know those existed anymore. I sort of mentally assume that bond starts at about $5,000 and it goes up from there, no matter what your circumstances are.
And the bond comes back if they go to court. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So once the case is resolved, for better or for worse, right? If you win, the case gets terminated favorably for you. you get your bond back. If you lose, you get a notice. The obligor gets a notice about when and where to present you for deportation. And if you do show up, then the bond gets back.
Is that an exception that they came in for a person that just got in, instead of just mailing an NTA to them, that they came and detained them? Or is that the
No, I mean, I think that's the new norm, right? For a lot of people who would have otherwise just been the notice to appear in the mail, they're detaining them and taking them to the detention centers. And it's not just people with like very serious criminal histories anymore, or very recent arrivals who turned themselves in at the port of entry and asked for asylum. You're finding the whole mix of people with very minor criminal offenses in their history and things like that.
What if they had no criminal offense? Did that client in particular have some history?
She had a several-year-old misdemeanor where she had been the perfect probationer and finished everything early and was clearly not a danger. A few years ago, I had a client who was arrested on charges on like a Friday, and over the weekend, the DA decided this is nonsense. There was no crime. I'm not prosecuting this, and nonetheless, he was transferred to ICE custody by Monday.
Yeah.
So he actually sat in. It took us over a month to get a bond hearing for him. He sat in the detention center for over a month with no criminal convictions, right? With a single arrest that had resulted in a prosecutor declining to prosecute because they didn't think there was any evidence of an offense there.
It's crazy because there's resources that have to spend to detain someone for a month like that when it's not a risk and stuff like that. There's got to be more priority people that they go after.
And that person got the same bond as my person last week, right, who actually had a conviction, although a misdemeanor from 2 years ago. So that should show you that the judges are very varying in how they handle bond cases.
So, you get a lot of calls where someone just calls you and says they just picked them up right now and you got to jump on it and go do stuff?
That woman who I bonded out 2 weeks ago, her husband called me at 7 o'clock at night and said, my wife was taken by immigration this morning. So we were able to get on that one really quickly. Today I got a call from somebody whose brother was detained yesterday morning. What do you do? I mean, you first try to figure out where they were taken, right? Mm-hmm. Which detention center are they at? Then you have to analyze, are they eligible for bond? Either immediately or at some future date, depending on how the case goes. And you have to evaluate why have they been detained, right? Is it that they've never had an immigration court proceeding and they're going to start removal proceedings? Is it that they have a final order of removal that's never been executed and now they're picking them up to execute it? Is it because they re-entered after they were deported and now there's reinstatement? Mm-hmm. All of those things provide much different options for what you have to do, right? Is it a reasonable fear interview? Is it a federal court challenge to the reinstatement? Is it a motion to reopen the unexecuted removal order, or is it just analyzing, okay, you're in court proceedings now, what are your options for status before the judge?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a lot of work. So if someone calls you at 7 o'clock at night, when do you start jumping on that?
Well, I was in the car when that voicemail came through, so I called him back right away, and I think I was able to squeeze him in the next day in between other appointments to come in and talk about his case or his wife's case in this instance. And
how do you come return a record if the person's been detained? How do you get the G20, EOIR 20, that kind of stuff signed?
Well, the EOIR 28 only has to be signed by the lawyer.
Oh, okay.
So for the attorney of record in the court, it's not a big deal. In terms of getting a G28 signed so that you can talk to their deportation officer or try to get records from them, ERO, the Enforcement and Removal Operations, the folks that are the deportation officers, will accept a G28 that just says detained on the signature line. But that won't work, for example, for FOIA. So if you want to FOIA your client to find out what the heck happened, you're going to have to go see them in detention and get their signatures. You're going to have to mail it, or you have to mail it to the detention center and have them send it back to you, depending on which is faster.
In detention, do they allow you to have have a pen in that person's hand, or does an officer do that? Or
it totally depends on the detention center, right? So in the LA area, we have 3 different detention centers. Theo Lacey and Music, which are both in Orange County, and Adelanto, which is in San Bernardino County. Adelanto is the one with, in my view, the most favorable conditions for meeting with lawyers. They actually have meeting rooms. You can close the door. Your client can sign things. They can hand you papers. You can hand them papers. Music is sort of the medium range. You actually sit at an elementary school cafeteria table with little stools on either side, and so you sit here and your client sits here. It's not as nice because there's no privacy. There's an office, a sheriff sitting in that room, so who can hear everything that's being said. They even have actually an inmate-run coffee stand in that room, so there may even be another inmate who's manning the coffee stand who's able to hear whatever you're talking about. But at least, again, you can kind of hand stuff back and forth across the table. You can show something to your client to review. That's nice. The Adelanto is also nice because you can take a computer in. The Orange County facilities are sheriff-run facilities, while Adelanto is run by a private company, GEO. In the Orange County facilities, they don't let you bring a computer in, so you have to do like hand notes with your client. In addition, in Adelanto, you can call and leave a message. Please ask my client to call me. You know, there's no such thing in the sheriff. They won't take messages. You just have to drive down there and talk to your client or send them a letter saying, call me in 3 days.
Yeah.
And then Theo Lacey is sort of the worst setup in my view. It's exactly what you think of as a county jail. There's a plastic screen between you and your client. There's a phone that you have to talk to. If you need them to sign something, you have to take it to the officer, who then has to take it around to them to get their signature and then bring it back to you. Yeah. There's no sliding of papers. You know, if you need to show them something, you have to put it up to the screen for them to look at in the plastic screen.
Being chosen one of those is depend on the severity of your background, just random.
It's just where they have bed space.
And then, there's a lot of talk about the use of private prisons and immigration and how it's a negative, but it seems in this one circumstance it's kind of better, or just this is a...
So, I mean, Adelanto has its own issues.
Yeah.
They've been investigated a lot for lack of access to quality medical care. They house a lot of Franco detainees there, which are people who have been deemed mentally incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been a lot of investigation into whether or not they have sufficient mental health resources to be detaining, that population. So they have their own issues. There's actually a hunger strike going on right now at Adelanto, where a number of the detainees are striking because of conditions of confinement. However, from my perspective, solely on the issue of meeting with your client, it's nicer. There's also contact visits with the family members for most of the detainees. They just they sit around a table with their family. They can hug their kids, as opposed to, again, like Theo Lacey, where it's the telephone.
How often do you go to a detained case to meet in person? Because with LA traffic, it seems going to kill your time.
Yeah, so it's actually just this almost the same amount of time to drive to Adelanto, which is 100 miles away, as it is to drive to the Orange County facilities, which are like 35 miles away because of traffic. Adelanto is not so bad. It's a reverse commute. So once you get out of the city traffic, it's mostly just freeway driving. How often do I go? More often than I would like to be driving, particularly to Adelanto. But you go and you line up all your clients for the day. You have court, then you meet with this client to work on the declaration, then you do an intake with this new potential client. You meet with the client who had court to explain what happened and what you need to do next. You make a whole day out of it, or at least that's how I handle them.
No, you gotta. I mean, you can't be going to Adelanto every day back and forth for one person. It's practically not possible.
No, I'm going out Monday. I've got court for one client. I'm going to start prepping another client for his merits, and I'm going to review a declaration with a third client while I'm there.
And these are all cases that are going to go to LA court here downtown?
No, Adelanto has its own immigration court at the detention center. Both the men's side and the women's side of the facility have court. So there's one judge on the women's side, and there's 5 judges now on the men's side.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find different levels of adjudications or from LA court downtown as opposed to there, or is it just?
I mean, the judges have different styles, I've noticed. So, for example, in Adelanto, when I have a bond hearing, all the judges I've appeared before will take my documents and review them. Mm-hmm. Some of the judges in the downtown detained court, which handles the Orange County facilities, if you've negotiated something off the record with the government, or even if you haven't and you're just answering their questions, they may make a decision without receiving your nicely tabbed packet, and you think about all the trees you just killed for no reason.
But you gotta just format it. If you don't do that, it's a problem. So
no, if you don't do it and then they want to see the documents, then you look unprepared. So I always do it anyway. But I just always notice that distinction between them. I don't think I've ever had an Adelanto judge not take my packet at the beginning to look at the documents. But I have definitely had judges at the LA Detained Court who are just like, answer my questions. I don't want to see the documents right now.
And is Adelanto, that court over there is just as packed as is here, as in downtown? Like, if you go to downtown, it's like a room full of people, and is that kind of style?
Yeah, I mean, the detained courts are always a little bit different in terms of the setups, right? You don't have as many people typically on the calendars as you do at the non-detained court. There's 4 judges at the LA detained court, so there's fewer judges, and presumably, hopefully, fewer cases being assigned in total than at Adelanto, where you have 6 judges. But I think Adelanto also draws fewer people. It's easier to get in because it's only the detention center and the the court, right, as opposed to the LA detained court where it's in the federal building, where you also have people coming in for ICE check-ins and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services interviews and the post office, and there's some bankruptcy judges, I think, in the building, and
the lines
there's a Social Security office.
Last month, it's just every time I go there, we're running throughout the building.
It's unbelievable. I mean, luckily for the attorneys, there's an attorney entrance, but you still have to tell your clients to show up 2 hours early just to get through the line.
And my clients are getting there right before their appointment because they'll come 45 minutes, an hour beforehand. It just takes time to get in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So you like the practice of immigration law? You're going to continue it?
I do. Absolutely.
And so that's good because a lot of people, one is law students are like, is this what I like? Is it possible to enjoy it? And even with the difficulties, it's still something you like doing,
I do. I mean, I have several colleagues who have either made the decision to leave the practice or are thinking about it, just they're feeling burned out. Mm-hmm. This administration has been particularly hard on us as immigration lawyers. All of the enforcement, all of the extra scrutiny of benefits applications, all of the requests for evidence that we weren't getting before on these cases. I'm not there, thankfully. I'm still wanting to fight that good fight for my clients, and I still enjoy the work I'm doing, but I definitely understand why some of our colleagues, as a matter of self-care, have just said, I have to step back. Maybe I'll come back in a few years when things are different, but right now I can't handle this anymore.
Do you have any speaking gigs? Are you going to be at LA National speaking this year?
I'm going to be at LA National speaking. I was actually on the planning committee for the conference this year, so I got to have a little bit of say in where I got to speak this year. I'm speaking on a panel about how to litigate circuit court cases, actually, federal appeals. I spoke at the AILA Midwinter Conference also, which happened to be here in Southern California this year. I'm speaking in April at the LA County Bar Association's Crimes and Immigration CLE. It's the first week of April. And that's going to be a sort of a crimmigration focus, but also talking about how you work with criminal defense counsel at the beginning of cases to try to, resolve them in an immigration neutral fashion for clients.
Preparing for those kind of panels, it takes a lot of time. Like, I know when I've done AILA stuff for National, you got to meet with your group and talk and stuff like that.
I'm the discussion leader this year for my AILA National, so I had to be the one that's, come on, people, we said this was the deadline. Please send me your stuff. And I'll have to do that again in another few months when it's time to submit the PowerPoint.
How much sleep do you get at night or on a...
Sleep is such a relative term, right?
Actually,
I'm a pretty good sleeper.
I think your daughter got sleep trained pretty early, or how long did that take?
We had to sleep train her twice. Mm-hmm. Each time it took, between 3 and 7 days probably. But the first one was to help her get to sleep because you would put her down and it would be screaming bloody murder.
Yeah.
And then that one took maybe like 3-4 days. Then she started waking up in the middle of the night, though, howling like somebody was, torturing the poor kid. And so we had to start doing sleep training for her to get back to sleep. That took a little longer. Grandma who lives with us was not so hot on letting her cry in the middle of the night.
Same situation with us. So the same setup.
We had to sort of say, Grandma, you got to give it the 10 minutes. You got to before we do anything, right? That's the only way this works. So it took a little longer, I think, to do sleep training because we had to sleep train Grandma a little.
Yeah.
What's great is I think I sleep trained myself. I'm finding that I sleep through when she wakes up and cries, it takes longer to wake me up now, which I think increases the chances that she falls back asleep naturally. So I guess sleep training was successful on the parents, at least.
It's kind of crazy because, like, we're going to talk about sleep training instead of immigration, but, like, my mother-in-law, it's, like, torture when he's, like, not crying. I'm like, just got to let him cry. But it's,
Oh, no. And I'm sure your mother-in-law says, when your wife was a child, she never, right, my mom tells me, I never let you cry. Never. I always held you when you woke up. I always held you till you fell asleep. Everything that they say is a success for sleep training now.
But yeah, it's crazy how they scream and yell and they fall down asleep.
And they just roll over and I'm like...
And it's because I'll take him out and I'll play with them or let him walk and the crying stops immediately. So it's really just communication. It's not pain for them. It's just saying, I don't want to be here.
Well, I think my kiddo's teething right now too, so it's a little bit of both. But you're right. I mean, they're so hard for them because they can't tell us, I'm cold, I'm hot, right? I'm thirsty, whatever. Or I need a diaper change. Mm-hmm. The communication is just we're not there yet verbally. Mama, we've got, but not much beyond that.
That's good. I just have babble right now, but I think girls probably learned some words better.
We've got mama, dada, and sometimes mama, dada, but not, and baba, but Baba is very non-specific. It's not necessarily the bottle. It might be the dog sometimes. It's hard to tell.
Baba encouraged me his dad, and I thought I would teach him, but he sometimes just says Baba, Baba, Baba. It's just like a fun thing for him. So.
Oh yeah, and Mama, Dada are like sort of gender non-specific terms for any adult in the room.
Yeah.
Like I think she has it narrowed down to it being some adult figure in the room, but it's definitely not necessarily me or my husband.
So if someone wanted to follow up with you, and particularly to keep track, because I see when you review these cases, it's always interesting to see what certificates are. What's the best way for someone to follow you on social media and to contact you?
So there's a couple ways, right? You can go to my website, www.sabrinadamast.com, and at the bottom of the homepage, there's a little box that says sign up for Sabrina's newsletter. Sabrina's newsletter is at 10 a.m. after I ever post anything on the blog. You get an e-blast of whatever it is I just posted on the blog, which is also on the webpage. It's sabrinadamast.com/journal.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Facebook page for my law firm, Law Office of Sabrina Damast. I also post, the blog links to the blog post there, so that's another way you can check it out. And I'm on Twitter at Damast Esquire, I think. Ooh, I don't remember. I need to check my Twitter.
I'll find out from the show notes. I catch him on Twitter because I also see like back-to-back stuff happening.
Right,
like,
so that's what I do. That's what I do, right? I'll have the last 3-4 weeks, and I'll blog them all, and then I'll post them all on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll get a massive influx of knowledge.
And what is good, I'm always surprised, like, wow, she went and read all these dense cases and stuff, like, and that's pretty good.
This weekend is probably going to be a blogging weekend because we're about a month since the last set of blog posts.
Now, I've fallen behind. What I started doing is I would read all the L1As, AO cases, and then I started doing notes on them, but I'm stuck. I haven't done them. I'm on the June cases right now. And
you gotta catch up, John. Yeah. Come on.
So I sit down and I do it, but after you read like 30 of them back to back, I just my brain wants to explode. And I take a break and then I lose track, and all of a sudden months go by. But I'm trying to get back into it. So
it's a good skill. It really helps you. I wish I had more time to do the unpublished cases still. I still subscribe to Ben Winograd's IRAC unpublished BIA decision compendium because I think it really helps you see sort of the trends. The unpublished cases really show you what's trending, where is the BIA sort of going, or the Ninth Circuit, or whatever court you're looking at. So I wish I still had time to go do the blogging on the unpublished cases for the Ninth Circuit and the other circuits, because I think it really did help me see these trends that are on the horizon. But there's just so many cases when you're doing that. It was a good thing to do back when I had time to blog every week as opposed to every month.
And when you start your practice, you have less clients, you have always have this stuff.
Yeah, you set these super ambitious goals. I'm going to read these things every day. I'm going to spend an hour on this. Every month I'm going to write an article for publication, right? Every month I'm going to go to a networking event. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm so tired. I just want to go home.
That's good thing for people that are starting out, especially law students, so they have a little more time or starting your own firm. That's the thing, dude. Read these cases, do synopsis, put them out there so your expertise grows and your confidence grows.
It's great for you because you really stay on top of things. It gets your name out there. People start recognizing that, hey, I don't know this. Maybe John knows this. It's an L1 question. Hey, John, do you understand this unpublished AAO case? What are they trying to tell me? I can't even come up with a question because I don't know about L1s.
I'm kind of getting over there. It got so difficult about nonsense that I'm it's burning out all of it. But I'm going to hold over, see what happens in the next administration. And the problem is once they put these USCIS officers, for example, in, they're not still going to leave. So we have these managers in place. Some are good. Some, it's just unbelievable how they treat these cases. So we're stuck with it until there's turnover or something like that, or a new policy comes.
New memo, something.
Yeah. But we'll see. I don't know. Let's not get too much into politics. It seems like Trump's just going to get reelected. We're going to have another 4 years. When is election time?
Don't say that, please. As an immigration lawyer, we're taking it one day at a time. Yeah. We're just the light at the end of the tunnel right now. We think is less than 2 years away.
Other people are like, oh, it's so good for business. I'm like, I don't want any of this kind of business. No, thank you.
And I feel like that's such a misnomer anyway. I don't know about you. It's true I've, in absolute numbers, gotten more consultations, but the proportion of people that are actually eligible for something that come to see me hasn't really changed from one administration to another. You just have a lot of folks that probably already knew from previous consultations that there wasn't anything they could do, so scared that they're coming to see lawyers again. And of course I want people to be armed with knowledge so that they don't get defrauded by unscrupulous non-lawyers in particular, right, in the community. who promise them, pies in the sky. But it's also very depressing to have to sit there and analyze someone's life for 60, 90 minutes, then tell them, look, I'm sorry, you're not eligible.
It is what it is. Yeah,
That's what it is.
I feel like as far as being a cancer doctor with patients, or like, you got cancer, like, that's it. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
And they can't help you too much. Maybe some chemo, but who knows what's going to happen with that.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's true that, I guess the flip side of that is it means that I'm getting, on absolute numbers, more complex and interesting cases where I get to employ crazy new strategies and see if they work. But that's also very taxing on the time, right? I mean, and I have a lot of, complex litigation cases in the immigration court right now. And each one requires a lot of legal research and strategizing and what kind of evidence and what kind of legal arguments and what kind of testimony. And it becomes, it's interesting, but it is very time consuming too to do those kinds of cases.
Yeah, well, especially one reason I do more of this podcast, this training kind of stuff is like, immigration law is super interesting to me, but the day-to-day of doing it with clients, and I love the clients too, but it's very time consuming. It takes a lot of emotional bandwidth out, and so I'm like, I wish I could just do it, but have less of the consequences and the deadlines of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're teaching. Maybe that's why, right?
Yeah, less money though. I guess the stress comes with the higher fees and all that, I guess.
No, but teaching is such a good way, right, to sort of to strike the balance, right? You're training the next generation of defense advocates, which is so fantastic, and you get to still keep on top of like the cutting edge stuff because that's part of academia, right? The new thoughts, the new policy making, how to promote new ideas and new ways of looking at the policies. Yeah,
and you're doing the research so that someone could just get the final product and save them the time of doing that.
Absolutely.
And that means they get to what they need to do faster rather than reinventing the wheel the whole time. That's one of the things I primarily try. My goal is to have people like you and talk about this stuff and get it out that you've read these circuit decisions. They could follow you on Twitter. So instead of them studying it, you're doing the work, and they just pick up on that.
And hey guys, it's free.
We'll see what we can do about that.
I have not monetized my blog. You could go see it anytime you want on my website.
So thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. There's a lot we can talk about. We will have different sessions to it, but I just want to get the audience to get to know you and what you do.
Well, thank you for having me, John.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for tuning in and listening to me.
Thanks so much. All right, everyone. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.